I'm guessing it is too dark in here. I'm going to go ahead and hit this light now. It's funny how brown this light tends to make things, isn't it? I was having a discussion. I'm sorry. I was looking at this question that's coming up, and I may as well just get right to it. Actually, a gentleman named Peik. I've been thinking of expanding my own palette from brown/blue to color, and wanted to ask if you have some advice regarding the opacity of paint. To be more specific, should the pigments used in a palette be of the same opacity/transparency to make the wet into wet blending more manageable? It's interesting. I'm so fascinated by a palette that goes from brown to blue. I assume that must mean just simply a warm, cool kind of a construct, but I've never seen or heard of that before. So maybe you could enlighten us some more, Pike, and tell us what that's all about. You certainly feel free to, by the way, to go to my email if you want to send me something. It's Ingbretson_studio@yahoo.com. In any case, there's a long discussion about transparency that it seems to be completely obviated by once you get to the Monet era. And I say that, I mean, there's so much going on historically and continuing today that has to do with using glazing, and you're looking for transparent color to do that. Typically, except maybe for the first layer if you want that to be more opaque. But when you're working the way we do, coming out of the Gamble/Boston School background, and I think Gamble's paint was the same as the Boston School's paint, and I want to say, well, I'll give you some serious limits and all this sort of stuff when I talk this way, but Gamble's paint was, basically opaque paint. I mean, Ang would say paint opaquely. So, I mean, a lot of people are funny in talking about Ang, but he uses that word, actually. He uses the word opaque. But I believe our palette is in no need whatever of creating transparency. So, and yet there's a whole bunch of colors, and one of them noticeably being alizarin crimson, that are, astonishingly transparent. They're seriously transparent colors. I've run through my palette before. Gamel's palette had a bunch of earth colors. Earth colors are notoriously opaque. Now there are exceptions. I mean, I know that Daniel Green liked sap green. That's a ridiculously translucent. Prussian blue is really translucent. There are levels of these translucency. I call transparent the same thing. I find that the green viridian is far less translucent, or you could even say that the ultramarine seems to be a little less transparent than Prussian blue. But these conversations, I find they're not relevant with the way we paint. You don't much need to deal with it. So I think that's the ultimate answer to your question. Do I need to spend more time on it? But of course, I'll be more specific though. The question of transparency, as it relates to shadows, and I know this isn't exactly what you're asking right now, but the question of transparency has so much to do with, what happens in the shadows, the atmospheric qualities and all those sorts of things. And there's some very amusing examples. Early Rembrandt, you find him, one of the particular small studies, small self-portraits in the MFA is like, I'd swear it has an eighth of an inch thick, translucent goop, glaze. And if I'm remembering right, he's even clawed out some shapes or whatever, some drawing out of this puddle. But we found that transparency as it relates to shadows, isn't really a function of something called transparency. It's a function of having the color and intensity right. If you have the value, color, and intensity right, and you have your shadows flat, meaning they aren't full of ridiculous bouncy forms, you'll have the look of transparency. And by the way, when I say not having that look of bouncy forms or form just jumping out of the shadows, if you're already doing that, it's kind of a rule of thumb that was introduced to us by Gamel, which is when you're doing those areas, and this is the obscure, chiaroscuro, the obscure and the clear of Da Vinci. When you're working into those passages that are essentially lost, and particularly those that are in shadow, say in a room, as I'm sitting here and all sorts of other things maybe around me, behind me, might appear to be in shadow, the basic treatment is you blur your eyes slightly and all that stuff unifies and you paint it that way. And then this is the expression, you see with how little you can bring out the reflected lights and those other kinds of secondary lights in those things. But the rule of thumb is see with how little. It's an interesting expression, isn't it? But if you bring them out too much, and I'm not making a really side point, but if you bring them out too much, they're going to wreck your atmosphere, right? But the key to atmosphere, we've simply found, is to be accurate in your color and your chroma and your value in that larger note that you see behind me. So that's just a side point. But no, I've never found an issue, and the palette we had with Gamel had included transparent alizarin, for example, which is ridiculous, right? And relative levels of transparency, I want to tell you that some of the cadmiums have a sort of some level, not much. And but there's a sort of a progression through the palette that we use when you'd say, well, this is transparent and that isn't. And there's never been an issue with mixing it. I think it's just a question of comfort. You just get to a certain place, of experience, mixing color notes and or mixing colors. Or in the case of the Monet world, or even the Boston School world of admixing, where you set up a note up there on the canvas and then you set a color into that note, you're not going to find that these things make any difference at all. The other point I was going to make, though, is virtually every color you ever put in a canvas, virtually, but some seriously significant numbers of the colors you overlay on a canvas have white in them. And there's already, so for that reason alone, there's already an inclination toward toward opacity. So, and so I was in that world a minute ago, though, saying that don't you see that the earth tones are all really opaque. I don't know if, apart from a thing like sap green, which I'm not sure how I think of that in relation to the earth tones. Some of them, like Venetian red, appear to be more transparent than Indian red, shall we say. And those were both on the palette, or English or Venetian, and then Indian red, and then all these yellow ochre and so on. But as I say, each one of those things, once you mix them with white, they're already going to drop significantly. And most of the use of any of those tones, you'd say, for example, if you're painting with reds and you need a cool red, you're going to have to put white into alizarin, right? Unless you need a really dark red, just put it up there straight. But as soon as you put white into alizarin, it starts becoming just as opaque as cadmium, shall we say, and so it goes, So, yeah, and I think that's probably enough for you. I really commend you in that effort because, the party is just about to begin for you. And I find it fine, to do things in limited ways if you want. I think of it as training wheels, if you want to call it that, on a bicycle. I never had any. None of my friends had any. We couldn't afford training wheels, so we just got on the bike and fell over a few times. But I'm not much as a teacher. I'm not much of a fan of stand-ins, to help you. Humans aren't. We may do dumb things, but we're actually pretty smart. And you don't. I've never found you need training wheels. So. And I mean in the world of painting. But I will suggest to you that in the world we're in, you're breaking down the world of values and light effects created by values only from the world of color. Well, you can paint them differently. I suggest, and I set my students up initially in studying with me to learn to draw and to learn to hit color notes and to do them, right away, to be into both those worlds right away. And then you begin that analysis, you begin that search in those separate ways. But in the meantime, then we set up still lifes, and I'm expecting you to paint directly in full color those still lifes. I'm wandering around on this one, but your point is actually that your question, should the pigments used in a palette be the same opacity, transparency to make them wet to wet blending, to make that blending wet to wet more manageable? And I've never found it makes any difference, and so I really think you'll be fine. Just use what colors you like. I'm going to suggest to you, though, that I've found, you can use a palette of 5 colors, or you can use a palette of 20 colors. I found that over time, I've gradually eliminated colors. You can mix, you can take a particular cadmium, say in the yellow family, and you can have all these cadmium oranges and yellows light and all these through the oranges, through the reds. And the bigger part of them and the most of what they do can be mixed with 2 of those colors, the end yellow and the cadmium, say, scarlet. And and over time, I've just found, or the scarlet plus alizarin, gets you so close to a cadmium red light that you can do virtually anything you can do with the color. So I don't want a big palette full of stuff and worry that I have to find exactly the right color like a pastelist might be doing. I just simply have found, though, over time that I want a palette from which I can mix virtually anything that you ever could put on the palette through a tube. If I can't mix them, then I might want to look around. And the second part of that, of course, is that I want to be able to have colors that a palette that will deliver on most of the colors I ever see setting up in front of me. Say if I have a brightly colored picture, or floral, whatever you want, I want to be able to hit any of those notes. Well, we don't use the quinacre, what are they called? Quinacryline, whatever, reds. They're really, really important notes. If you really want to hit roses or something like that, you might want to switch, unless you want a dull rose. And I say that meaning we're not trying to paint absolutely the color of the rose, but you'll find that there's a quality there, especially if there's a certain life in a cold end, a very high-end cold red. That's a better color, and so I would suggest switching. Well, in the winter, in the summertime, painting outdoors, I suggest adding 2 colors, which is the Sevres blue and the cadmium. Permanent green. Yeah, permanent green light. But you have otherwise, for me, just 5 colors. You have ultramarine, viridian, cadmium yellow, lemon, and then, or it's cadmium lemon it's called maybe, then cadmium scarlet, and then alizarin crimson. And those are the only colors I use. I don't need any more. I can mix virtually anything, and any earth color can be mixed. It's just a dumbing down and a combining process, right? Get the right amount of green, yellow, and whatever, and you can get a very dead yellow called yellow ochre. I've seen so many people swearing by yellow ochre. There's nothing about yellow ochre that's special as far as I can see when you're an impressionist. Your job is to be able to mix any color. And the dumb colors, they don't do anything for you. They're not useful for mixing 3rd and 5th kinds of colors. So, and all they can do is mix dumber down colors. So how much dumber down do you want your yellow to be than yellow ochre? But I can go from cadmium lemon. I can really mix. It takes a serious long distance to get as dumbed down as yellow ochre or Naples yellow are. So, people have different ways of painting. So that's one of the reasons they pick other things. Some people are doing imaginative work and therefore they, for example, set a skin color for the whole painting and stuff. There's a whole different animal there. I'm talking about if you're painting from life and you actually want to hit the notes in front of you. And that's where I go back just to saying it. So sometimes you'll just bring in another color. Sometimes it'll be orange or something. Some of my students were painting a guitarist out on the hill at a beach this week. And that yellow out there, that brilliant golden shimmering guitar was, you wouldn't say you were trying to match it, but you could easily see that if you had such and such a note, a color available, you would have been able to match it. You would have been able to make it a much more effective note. And but we nearly, and in my palette, I could nearly hit that note without adding. But you might add a cadmium orange just for that purpose. But that's all. Nothing to do with transparencies. We're sort of stuck in this world with some being more transparent, some being less, and You don't want to limit your right to use, for example, a dark red because virtually all of them are transparent. So, all right, Pike, nice to hear from you. Palmgren, I'm guessing you're from my part of the world, what I call my part of the world, Scandinavians. I'm literally from Wisconsin, or Denver by way of Wisconsin. But my folks were, my grandparents, great-grandparents, I should better back it all the way off, were from Norway, as I understand. Anyway, do remember to subscribe, share, and comment, and we'll see you next time.